Hello, 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 and welcome back to our Finding Better podcast. My name is John Suzuki, and I am your host. And this is a place where we come to share ideas and wisdom, real life experiences, because sometimes the best way to be successful is to copy success, right? And that's what we want to do. It's all about helping you and helping folks find better, because when we make one person better, we lift the world. And that's what we're all about here. So here's the thing as we move forward in today's episode. If you are in business or you're in sales or have ever wished there was a way to resolve a dispute in a way where you and your adversary actually feel good about it, weird thought, right? Well, we've got some amazing things to share with you today on getting to win-win, not win-lose, not lose-lose, but win-win. And it's actually remarkably easy if you know what you're doing. And we're going to teach you how to live a better life with win-win right now. My guest is John Rice. And John is a big time attorney who was one of three attorneys who brought mediation to this country. Whoa. So he's the founder of the Windcrafting Academy in Arizona, and he's author of the book called Windcrafting. That's WIN. And windcrafting is all about making conflict disappear and eliciting collaboration, cooperation for wonderful results in bringing folks together. John Rice, welcome to Finding Better. Thank you for joining me.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for having me be able to join you. This is very exciting to get to talk with you about this. We share an amazing amount of common purpose and
Yeah,
trying to make a
totally,
difference for
totally.
people in the world.
Making a difference. That's all we're doing. That's all we're doing. So, talk to me a little bit about how you came across, or not how you came across, but um, uh, a little bit of your wisdom, a little bit of your personal experience of how you came up with windcrafting and what that means. Because we live in such a world today of winners and losers, and especially in the world of litigation, especially in the world of law. But I mean, there's ways to get to win-win, and I want to hear what you have to say.
Well, by way of background, when I was growing
Hmm.
up, there's a lot of conflict in my family. There's some very unpleasant things going on. And so on. I had a father who was a stunningly wonderful surgeon. He lost three patients in nearly 50 years, which a surgeon can do in an afternoon, as you know. And he ended up being the chief surgeon at three major hospitals in our hometown in El Paso and so on. But as good as he was as a surgeon, he was playing win-lose in his life, and the other areas of his life, like family and children, tended to lose. So it was, it was challenging, and there were other things that I saw like that. And I went to university and became the Secretary General of the largest model student UN in the world,
The
and
the the largest what?
student model UN in the world. We brought students from
Model United Nations.
That's right. And we brought
Whoa.
students from all over the country, and it was fascinating to do that. And after brief story is I went back to the United Nations itself. Our keynote speaker had been the number two official there, and I asked if I could set up a model United Nations at the UN itself. And he laughed at me and he said, John, we've had this, people have suggested this idea since League of Nations days. We don't have the money for this. And I asked if he'd give me an office and a phone and I'd raise the funds. And he did, and I did. And we proceeded to bring students from all over the world to represent the point of view farthest from their own
And this was at the United Nations, the
at
United
The
Nations.
United Nations in New York
Wow.
City. I got to
Okay.
live in New York
Well,
City.
that would be a center of the universe kind of place for negotiations, right?
It was. And the thing that was striking to me, and I had begun to encounter this when I was in college, and it kept going, was I began to meet ambassadors who had
Hmm.
done stunning things in their life. You don't become an ambassador without having first gone into situations involving a lot of conflict. And some of these people had
Yeah.
produced gorgeous results. And I got to meet them because they were going to be sponsoring our program and endorsing our program and so on. I met about 68 of them, I think, at the time. And I would
And
ask
these
them,
are real life ambassadors.
yeah, these
I
are
mean,
the
these are
top
people,
from all over the
these,
world.
yeah, so this is a global community of people who are making things happen.
That's right. And had
That's
made
amazing.
things happen through the course
Hmm.
of their life. And I was just in awe of, I was young. I was meeting these incredible people that I had read about. I'd read their books and articles. And I would say to them when I met them, how did you do that in a particular situation that was just looked impossible? And they had
Right.
produced something gorgeous. And they'd tell me, they'd start in telling me the story. And I'd say, I know the story. I've read your book. I've heard you speak on this, but what are the steps? How did you get from minus to plus? And every one of them, immediately, the look on their face was they had no idea. They were intuitively brilliant, but they didn't know the steps. So that started an inquiry in me. When someone gets from very minus to very plus, what are the steps? And
Interesting.
that's the inquiry that I mean, one of them being if you're going to get to plus, you have to begin addressing what do people want instead of let's all talk about what we don't want and fight about it.
Well,
So
I mean, what strikes me is that when you ask them the question, what are the steps, and they couldn't answer that question, right? One
yes,
of the things as a business leader that I've always tried to do was to copy success and replicate it and
yes,
figure out, okay, so we did something right. What did we do right? Right?
right.
And looking back on it, what did we do wrong? But as important as it is to understand how you do things wrong or what you do wrong so you don't repeat that, in a lot of ways, it's even more important to understand what you did right so you can repeat that, and you can
Or
make that happen.
at least to begin to have people tell you examples, and because this applies to business leaders, of course, but it also applies to business leaders who might be doing some outrageous thing like trying to have a marriage work. I mean, you can play
Right.
with men in your relationships. And so it began an inquiry in me. Back to your original question, how did it begin? It began
Hmm.
an inquiry in me that was about what are the steps. And what I realized in very short order was that you had to at least put your energy exactly as you've been urging people to do toward what's really wanted here. Now, let's not just talk about spend 83 months talking with therapists about, oh, this is so terrible, et cetera, et cetera. You have to at some point say what do you want? And it
Yeah.
isn't what I discovered is it isn't just what do you want, it's what do you really want? And there's a universe of difference between those two things. I mean, when you go into, for instance, mediation, the way a lot of lawyers have been trained to do it, where they will end up telling you nobody here is going to end up happy with this, but we'll try and minimize loss. And the game isn't creating winning, it's minimizing losing. And for everybody concerned in getting at least the loss down with each person where they, okay, I can accept that rather than the worst loss, as
Yeah.
opposed to really being in an inquiry, a serious inquiry. What do you really want? And so I'd ask people, what do they really want? And they would
So,
start,
so,
go
so
ahead, go ahead.
just real quick, to your comment about, the typical mediation, right? I was unfortunately involved in one, and the mediator, I remember, I'll never forget this because I'm a win-win kind of guy, right? I really am. And the guy comes, he was a retired judge, and he comes in and he says, you know what? He says, a successful mediation is one where nobody's happy. I'm like,
I've heard
what,
that. I
what,
have heard that about 1,000
right?
times,
Right?
particularly
When
from
nobody's happy, I'm
lawyer
like,
mediators.
oh, what a crappy job you've got, kind
Yeah.
of thing, right? And
Yeah.
and to your other point about going from what do you want to what do you really want? In that moment that you said that, when you said what do you want, I'm thinking, okay, I know what I want. But when you said what do you really want, it shifted. It shifted. And that one word that you said of what do you really want, at that moment, it made a shift in my brain.
Mhm. Yeah. I can give you an example of a story
Yeah.
that happened. I was in law school and I had a very dear friend. Really, this was somebody I felt very close to. I'm not sure I had felt as close to someone in the ability to just talk about things. And we talked and talked and talked. And then one day it was early in the day and I got a phone call from him. And he said he just wanted to say goodbye because he had taken a large bottle of pills, and as soon as his body absorbed enough of them, he'd be dead.
Oh no.
And I had read about suicide, but I had never personally had an encounter with that. And I got off the phone, called emergency services. They got to his apartment, they got his stomach pumped in time that he didn't die. And
Wow.
everyone that knew him, and certainly I knew him very well at that point, we understood why that happened, why he had done that, because he was married at the time, had been married, the marriage was breaking up. He was very bright, and he had applied to grad school, and oh my gosh, he couldn't get into grad school, and he was driving a cab to make a living, and he couldn't stand, and he could not see anything in his future that he wanted. So what he wanted was to stop living a life like this. That's the way he would have said it. And so what you do then is you kill
Yeah.
yourself.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
so
Oh my gosh.
yeah, and so
That's
he
that is
survived
that is
that.
the wrong way to define it,
Well,
right?
yeah, well, but
I mean,
but when
holy
people
smoke.
say less than what they really want, they're doing a variation on that. They're doing something that is going to not uplift them, but bring them down. And it may not kill them, but it sure isn't going to do their health any good or their stress, all of that. So the rest
Wow.
of that story was we eventually went in separate directions, the way it happens in the world so often. And eventually I got a phone call from him. This was years later. And he asked me if I would please give a talk at his church about being effective around conflict. He knew what I did and so on. And when I say his church, he had eventually gotten into a doctoral program and become a psychologist. He then studied theology, and he was the pastor of this church. That's what became of his life, and he was loving it. And he introduced me to his congregation. And in the process, he said, "This is the person I called when I attempted suicide." And then he
Oh
got this
gosh.
very far away, happy look on his face. He said, "That was such a growth experience for me." And I had a visceral, I was standing right next to him, and I had a visceral, I won't use the bad language because there was a bad word that I used. Why the heck didn't you think of it as a growth experience back then when you were going through these negative things that you now think of as having been the miraculous emerging? And
Right.
it had been raw for me all those years, that experience. It was an awful experience to go through with him. And I had a visceral, literally, the thought occurred to me, don't punch him in the nose in front of his congregation. Now, I've only punched someone once in my life. When I was a very little boy, there was this boy who came to visit, and he started hitting me. And he hit me 3 times. And I said, "I think you just need to go home." And he hit me again. And I said, "If you do that again, I'm going to hit you back." And he did it again, and I punched him in the stomach, and he folded up on the floor and ran home and was crying. And his mother called my mother and said, "Your son just hit my son." Oh my goodness. Anyway, I'm not into hitting people, but I felt such fury. He could have been dead, and he had made that choice to take those pills that he
Yeah.
took. And so there are variations on that I would say, when you're in business and you're not approaching this from the highest level of win your mind can imagine, or that you as a group can come up with, if you're approaching from less than that, you're going to end up with physical symptoms, stress, all of that. And so anyway, when I met, this is all the way back to the ambassadors, I started thinking, okay, there is a better way. Now, what are the steps? And that began my inquiry, which resulted in win-win, but also in win-crafting. Eventually, it has now grown past win-win. I consider mediation an out-of-date term. Everybody knows what it means.
Right.
But now what we're interested in is windcrafting. But that's the
Okay.
evolution of it.
Okay. So we're going to I want to get into moving forward, right?
Yeah.
And what that is. But I just want to ask you a question on something you said. Um, you said, and I'm paraphrasing, that basically you want to start from a high position, not just what you want, but what you really want, right? So if I'm a salesperson, I was in sales all my life. If I want, just to give an example, I want to win $1 million deal. Okay. Um, do I start with 2 million? Do I start with I want to fulfill my quota? What does that what does that look like in that silly example?
Well, it's hardly a silly example because you know it exists all over the world, and I've dealt with this a lot. And where you start from is years before you have that conversation. You determine what people are needing and wanting in their life, and you find a way to help them have those things at a very high level. The kinds of things that are just worth $1 million to people when they have them. And sooner or later, somebody's going to come along and pay you $1 million for it. I'm
That's
not, I'm
wow.
saying it lightly,
Yeah.
but it
Yeah.
does trace back to that. It
Yeah.
traces to your wanting to make a difference. If you've got something that you don't believe in, and here, I don't really believe in this, but here, pay me $1 million for it. Good luck. You know, the
Yeah. 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 That's a sucky way to get it done. The reason why I got into sales was because of the joy that I found where when people bought my butter toffee peanuts that I was selling for the YMCA. And they just love my peanuts. And I went all over I was the number one butter toffee peanut salesperson for the YMCA in the state of California. But the amazing thing about that was the following year when the sales season came back again. People actually wanted to buy not only wanted to buy my product, but they wanted to buy cases of it.
yes.
And it was from that experience and I'm like, wow, it's not just about making money and fundraising. It really is about making people happy, you
And
know?
it's about making a difference. Another way that
Yeah.
that's said, when you make a difference with somebody, that's valuable in their life. And invariably, they're at least going to want to say thank you. And sometimes the thank you can be from somebody that has $1 million. They can thank you in a way like that while they, you know,
Yeah,
as
yeah, you
they're
never
doing
know.
it.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
just never know. And it could
right.
and it may manifest itself 10, 20, 30 years later. You just don't
That's
know,
exactly right. Oh my gosh.
right?
And so few people know that yet.
Yeah.
We're moving in that direction because up until now, we've lived in a world where the game is survival. So you want to make $1 million so you can survive well and all of that. But we're on a cusp where at this point, what we're more interested in is thriving. A lot of us, myself included, as anybody watching this can tell, some of us are already a lot older than people lived through human history. And
Yeah.
so survival is being handled. Thriving is a thrilling thing, and the rules are very different in a thriving game than a survival game. So you want to find something that is going to help other people thrive. And once you tip into that, like the I've forgotten what all was in that product, but it was a sweet
Yeah,
product.
butter toffee peanuts. Yeah, yeah,
Butter
yeah.
toffee peanuts. I was going to
Right.
say that, thought that can't be right, but yeah, it's funny because you said moving forward, which is hilarious because one of our two family cars just had to go into the shop yesterday because its reverse gear stopped working.
Uh-huh.
So we're very into moving forward around here. Moving in reverse can be good too. Can we go back a little and discuss what you just said and maybe approach it differently? Not what
Yeah.
you just said, but in the world. So how do you get people to shift from a I don't want minus. I'm gonna, that's the one thing that's not gonna happen. And no, no, really, I'm not gonna do minus to, what can we create that would be not just plus, because there's plus, whatever, that's fine, but really, really plus. I mean, even pure plus like that. Like
Yeah.
like the miraculous.
That's that. I mean, and the shift that you're making is going from win-lose to really win,
Yeah,
right?
and in a way, win-lose really eventually turns into lose-lose.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's just by
Yeah.
definition. And so
Yeah.
it's exactly what you just said. It's really, really winning. And it can be, we had an example of a neighborhood that came together and they were at war with each other. It was just amazing how much they disliked each other. They had found reasons not to like each other. And this was a fairly nice neighborhood in Phoenix. And one neighbor in particular, they asked me to come in and mediated a dispute that they had. And there were 34 of them in the room, something like that. And I said, so I don't know all about all of the disputes that have been going on that you've had, but is there one person in the room that you dislike more than anyone else? And they all had the same person.
Oh God.
And I said, so why do you dislike him that strongly? Well, because he always has his friends park cars in front of our homes and we can't, et cetera, et cetera. And so they had a thing about that. And so I called him up and to the front of the room and I said, what's your life about? And he said, well, I help people in these three particular ways. And he was soft spoken to the point of it was hard to hear him. And I said, so why all the cars? And he said, because I've told people that if they're in pain, especially really bad pain, drive over and come talk with me. And there's not always a place right in front of my house. And the look on people's faces, they had never, it never crossed their mind. And
Wow.
I said to them, out of curiosity, you're a picture of being a good neighbor. Any of you want to say anything about that? And this one woman burst into tears, raised her hand, and she said, I have had awful thoughts about you. I am so sorry. You can park on my grass yard, have your friends park anywhere. And everyone had the exact same reaction. And I said, out of curiosity, do you think that what he's been doing is a valuable thing? If so, would you please stand up? And everyone in the room stood up to his, now he was crying, and they stood up and he was just shaking. And I said, you're standing, but there's something missing. Maybe applause. So they gave him a standing ovation. And
Wow. Good for
a
you.
protracted standing ovation. And I said, there's still something missing. Anybody just want to give him a hug? And they lined up and
Wow.
gave him a hug. And the neighborhood was no longer in conflict with each other. They suddenly realized they had shared goals of making a difference in the world, and they were neighbors and they wanted to help each other do it. And they were
Isn't
no
that
longer in
amazing?
conflict. They had spent a fortune on attorneys before this, and that was all gone. And I'm sure it is to this day. It's a long time ago. Assuming they're still alive, it's probably going on.
Yeah, that is amazing. That is amazing. And you brought some communication to the room, right?
Actually,
And
I would not say it that way.
hmm
I would say I just observed that communication under the surface of what they didn't want and just commented on it. To me, it was speaking much more loudly than the negative. The plus was vibrating so hard from every one of them, but they didn't know it was even there.
yeah,
And
and
when
you
you're doing
surfaced
that,
it.
I
You
just,
surfaced it.
well, I was looking for it. And when you look for it, it's more than on the surface. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous bubble that comes out toward everybody. And if you're looking for it, you can see it in any moment, in any conflict, is what I've discovered in nearly 10,000 mediations that I've done. That that indwelling huge plus lives in them. You just have to bring it out.
Wow. And talking about the steps that you went through in that example, what were the steps? You walked into, first of all, the meeting, you set up this meeting. But what were the steps? What were
Actually,
you
they set up the
seeing?
meeting and invited me. And
Okay.
in traditional conflict resolution theory and practice, going back 600 years in the literature, more than that, there are always four steps. The first one, as you know, is well, you go see a lawyer or therapist, and the first thing they say to you is, well, tell me about your conflict, sweetie. And it's like, oh my God, here we go again. I call that the zero step. And I don't let people
Okay.
tell me about their conflict at all. I may ask a question that gives me the essence of the conflict. I'm looking for the essence, not for what happened. Like, oh, they parked cars in in front of our house. I wasn't looking for their complaint about that, but why is that happening? And when
hmm
you're looking for it, it's like the expression that gets used so often in lots of religions say God is everywhere. So if God is doing something in that circumstance, I want to know what that is, not what the neighbor's opinion about the ongoing events might be. And so, you move to the usual step two, which is okay, okay, I get we've now talked for 27 hours about your problem. I think I get it. So what do you want? Except that's not the real step one. The real step one is what do you really want? And once you find what's really wanted, the real step two is, so what are you going to do about it? And in that instance, there was a standing ovation and hugs. That's really it
Oh
really
my
was a
gosh.
lovely way to finish that. And then the third step is you just look at what you've got, the result. So you're going from what do you really want to, okay, I get that. Now what are you going to do about it? And now that you did that, what do you think of what happened?
And what you just summarized um, is the process you used in 10,000 mediations that got you to a good result.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That is amazing.
And it
And
takes
it's,
the other thing I should add is it takes me 20, 30 minutes, and that's all working with people.
you know, wow. One of the sayings that I'd carried with me throughout my career is they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Oh,
And
wow.
and
Oh, wonderful.
right and a big part of life is, you know, I have this umbrella um over everything that I do and everything that I've seen in my experience that says it's all about love. It's all about love. And when if I distilled the example that you just shared with us,
Mhm.
um, I mean, for crying out loud, it's all about love, right? And you got them to hugs and tears. Um, that's amazing. Hey, listen, the last time we talked, you shared with me an example.
I know the
Uh,
bully story.
yeah, I'd like you to share that with
I
my
was just
audience
thinking that
because
I should share it now.
yeah, I'd love for you to share it, please.
This was a situation where I had been asked to teach all of the therapists and teachers at a high school level in about a five-city area here in my hometown of Phoenix. We met at one of the local high schools in an auditorium. There were about 250 of them, and I taught my seminar, How to Make a Conflict Disappear. And we took a break from the seminar and went to the high school cafeteria for lunch. And as we sat there, big, big cafeteria, through the far door of the cafeteria, this young man walked in. He looked 15 on his face. He was over 6'8", the most muscular human I have ever seen. He went and leaned against
Wait,
a
how
wall,
big? How tall was he?
over 6'8" at age 15.
Whoa. Okay.
Huge and muscular. And he leaned against one of the walls. And what I noticed was the kids were making it. He looked very young, but he had kind of a mean look on his face for whatever reason. It was attention getting to me all the way across the room. And the
Hmm.
kids in his vicinity were making a big circle around him. They're obviously afraid of him. And so I said to one of the teachers at that school, this fellow's really got my attention. Who am I seeing here? She said, this kid has tremendous potential, but he's also a very bad bully. So I got up and I walked over to him. I'm short, he's tall. Got up close to him and I looked way up and I said, can I ask you a few questions? Maybe tough, they're kind of personal. I knew he's too tough to say no. He said, sure. And I said, if your life works out the way you hope to, the way you hope it will, you're a little young to know yet, but do you know who you're hoping to become? And he stood up with, it's very moving to me, a lot of dignity. And he said, I'm going to be a Marine like my father and grandfather. And he started to tell me about his grandfather in World War II. And oh my gosh. And so I call that the new Sherlock Holmes game. If you want to know what's a win for somebody, if I walked up to him and said, what would be a win for you? This would be a difficult conversation. So I call it the new Sherlock Holmes
Great.
game. You look for a hint of what would be a win. So that was my hint that he wanted to become a Marine. And I said, second question, have you ever bullied anyone? The look of guilt was so fast he couldn't hide it. I said, third question, that squeaky looking little boy sitting about four tables away, all hunched over lunch. He looks very depressed, not eating with any friends. Um, he just looks in bad shape, but he's having lunch. Have you ever bullied him? And he said, I've never bullied him, but I've sure seen other people in this school bully him. And okay, got him now. I said to him, I worry about a kid like this, that he's going to commit suicide. He's not going to blossom in his life because he's so squashed. But what if he breaks through it all and he becomes the pediatrician who saves your child's life? And how I got there was his grandfather, his father, himself, his child would matter at that kind of level. And I cry when I think of the look, what happened next. He stepped back and the look on his face, he had never thought to look at another human being like that, and he just stared at this young fellow.
Oh.
And I said, "So, I you're too young to be a Marine, but how would it be if you became his best friend in this school? You encourage him in his studies, and you let everyone in this school know that he's under your protection." And he just loved it. I mean, the being bully, he wanted people to know he was tough, but you could see that looking at him. But nobody in that school was going to bully this kid if it meant they were going to have to get confronted by this kid. And he loved the idea. I don't think he'd ever consider bullying anyone again, and he will be protective of women and children, not to mention guys, that etc. So in a few minutes time, I mean, what I was looking for, there's something in his life he really wants. Yeah, there is. There it is. And how about if we find a symbol of that right now? And then he can, as he gets older, he can choose more and more senior symbols of, it's like when you were beginning to choose symbols of, I have something valuable. I'm going to sell that to people. And right now you're telling people that, like you, they have something valuable they'd like to sell to people. So you're giving a course in how to sell yourself and the difference you were born to make and like that.
Hmm.
So that's the bully story. But it took maybe 7 minutes, and
That
it's
is amazing.
yeah.
And I can imagine uh, when you suggested to the young man to be a champion, right? I mean, I'll
Yeah,
put it that way.
yeah.
To
In
not be a
his
bully
in
and to be a
his
champion,
system, that would be being a champion,
right?
exactly
I
as you're
mean, I
saying.
can imagine him just lighting up, just
He did.
lighting up. And
His
and
the
that
look on
one
his face I've never seen, and it was stunning. It was beautiful.
that one moment shifted his life.
Mhm.
I mean, that one moment changed that young man. And
And
wow,
in a way, it
wow,
changed him, and in a way, it began the fulfillment of who he was born to be. So, which wasn't a
yeah,
change at all. It
yeah,
was it was a
yeah,
change to the next
yeah,
level, but it
yeah,
was like that.
and as you did in the previous example, you brought him to the surface. And so this is, what you do, and what you've shared with us is such an art, and but it's something that is it something that is that an art and a skill, and it's also a skill that a guy like me can learn.
It's in the moment that we realize that what we want to do in life is make a difference. The only issue is how you're going to do that. And it's so individual. It is so individual.
Yeah.
Van Gogh did it with things like this, and in the
Yeah,
process,
yeah, he made shirts.
yeah, and
Yeah.
somebody saw his paintings, and our youngest son and his wife have a huge um, copy of the painting in their home. And when their little first child was born, our first grandchild, she recognized the painting. That was some of the first things she talked about was, oh, we have that painting, and
Hmm.
it's on their shirt. And it's a thrilling thing to know that that is alive to the point of being spectacularly inspiring in every human. And all you need is the opportunity to talk through and discover exactly what that is and how it might manifest next. And from my point of view, that's why conflicts come up. It's like when you're being given an opportunity. Yeah, here's a minus. Now, how do we get to as close to pure plus, the miraculous, as we can? But you have to look. You have to look for what that might look like next in life. And in the book that I wrote, the book is called Windcrafting, and it is I think of it as an art. It's an art form because each of us has a creativity in us. We can create the day. And you want to create minus,
Absolutely.
you've mastered minus. You could probably create minus in Carnegie Hall the way you've been doing it. You're so practiced at it, But it's not what we call beautiful music. It's a lot of,
Noise. Yeah.
yeah, a lot of noise, clanging on pots with a whatever metal lids. And so when you're actually looking looking for the plus, but way to the far plus side, it's there. And if you also, one of the things I talk about in the book Windcrafting, is the possibility. I mean, we can hold it that you're circle A and I'm circle B, and I'm not going to lose. It's a win-lose world, but so too bad. I'd love to have you win, but since we can't both win. But if you shift to that on some level, we may be different parts of the same circle, that we're one circle, not two. And if you're holding red and I'm holding blue, we may each hate the other color, the color the person's. You write about that in your book very powerfully. It's we may not like the color we're seeing, but if we find the essence that lives in that color, we're going to love that. And how do we move that essence forward?
That is
And
amazing.
yeah,
That is amazing. Um, wow. Wow. As you change that young man's life and perspective at that moment, I think that there's an opportunity for me and for my listeners to change our perspectives at this moment. And I haven't read your book. I'm going to read your book because this is th this is heavy stuff. It's heavy stuff that's really cool heavy stuff, right?
okay.
I mean, it's about people. It's about I mean, we're all here to love each other. We really are. And what I hear you saying is that you're kind of teaching us another level on how to do that.
There
And
one of the really important aspects there are you've heard the phrase an idea whose time has come.
hmm
And along with that, there are ideas which have failed the test of time. And
hmm
win-lose, the adversary system, those have failed the test of time. But that's what we've been taught. Now, windcrafting is an idea that has now arrived, and one of the aspects of it, it has some component ideas, like a package of ideas. For instance, the law of multiple 100%s and empowered illusion and some other things. I've kind of made up phrases for these things that explain them. And oh my gosh, I mean, empowered illusion. That's back to the fellow that was he was looking out. One of the things we talk about in the book is filters, that we
hmm
grow up with filters.
Oh,
And it's
totally.
like, oh no, I think I know what life will be like if I'm interacting with a person like you, whatever that means in somebody's head. But it's like picking up a big red filter and looking through it and saying, pardon me, oh shit, it's red out there. It's like you put the filters down and what you have is raw materials. And instead of empowering an illusion that's minus because my mind says it's minus, you
hmm
you look at what you'd actually like to be empowering. What idea would you like to empower? And that's kind of a new idea, that I mean, we've been so trained, get smart enough to figure out who the people are you're dealing with. And that doesn't have a great history in human history,
You
really
know,
a bad history.
there's so much to unwind, when you talk about unlearning what we've learned, right? I mean, what we've
Yeah,
been taught is win
that's
lose.
right. Yeah.
And part of that, you know, in sports, right? You
Yeah.
always have a winner, you have a loser. I love sports. I teach sports. I had my kids involved in sports. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. But there's and I hope that goes on forever. Um, but the ideas that we have in our heads about human interaction and contracts and business and dealing with people, the idea of the whole win-lose model being outdated and it being time for us to replace that. I'm totally with you on that, especially now. I mean, we live in a time where there's so much fear and there's just so much negative and contrary energy that we live with these days. What you're doing, John, and what you've taught us today is such a wonderful paradigm shift and such a
If I could share
wonderful.
a story about sports.
Okay, okay, we
In
we we need to wrap up. So
Okay, I'll
yeah,
try and do what I can to be efficient.
okay,
I'm not
okay,
good at that, as you've already seen. But um, when I was in high school, I was the manager of the football team for our high school. My dad was the
Hmm.
team doctor, and I wasn't big enough to be a football player, but I could help the team out, and I liked that. And we took a timeout because the game was tied 3-3. There were only a few seconds left in the game. And the question was, should we had the ball on our own, I think it was our 2 or 3 yard line. And so the issue was, should the quarterback at least attempt to do something or just go down on one knee, hold the ball, go down on one knee so the game would end at that moment. And I said in that timeout to the players, you know, you can you can end up with what you've got here, a tie, but isn't there something you actually want to have happen? And what is that? And I said, I suspect what you'd like. I mean, I know you've only got about 3 or 4 seconds to go, but you get one snap of the ball and maybe you could do something to win the game. I don't know what that would be like. And you should have seen what happened in the vibes. And they went back out on the field. The quarterback dropped back in the end zone and threw a 98-yard touchdown pass.
What do you really want?
It was amazing. I remember Willie was the quarterback. Willie Sanchez, who's still a dear friend, and he's an inspiring human being. And he dropped back in the end zone and he threw
Crazy.
a pass that Cisco Luevano caught on about the 40-yard line, and he outran everybody and scored, and that was the game.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
John, listen, where can people get your book?
Well, they can drop by the house. I would love
Okay,
if they
if they
did
happen
that
to
in
be in
Phoenix.
Phoenix.
We have some boxes of them here. They can go to bookbaby.com. That's our publisher, and they do a very nice job of packaging the book and sending it to someone. That's a lovely thing. Or they can get it at Amazon, any of those things.
Okay,
They can also walk into a Barnes and Noble. I mean, at least they can order it. They may not have it on the shelves, you know how they do, but
yeah.
they, there's a listing of, I think if you go online and type in windcrafting, you'd find a lot of places that at least sell it online and that kind of thing. And there's an
Okay.
ebook version. It's over, I should let people know, it's over a 500-page book. And some people absolutely love to read, and it's got great stories in it and all of that. But you can also get an ebook version, and we're about to start leading free webinars for everybody in the world. So some people get things better through their eyes and ears than reading a book. So we're gonna.
So how do people reach you and learn about what you're doing with these free webinars and stuff?
Well, we don't have it quite open yet, but we're about to make public a website called windcraftingacademy.com, and they can
Okay.
go there, and they can also phone me on my personal phone, 602-326-2425. Anybody that has anything going on that's a difficult thing, or if you just want to share, if you've created something beautiful and want to share that, I'd love to hear it, but I'd love to help if I can. And
And folks, John's not giving you his phone number to sell you his attorney services.
no,
This is amazing. It's all about giving and it's all about helping.
I
And
actually stopped practicing law um, a long time ago because my wife is just as an inspiring attorney. We decided if one of us was, after we got together, we're having children, if one of us was going to keep practicing law, it should be the one who's good at it, right? And that was her by far. It was very humbling experience for me. I mean, people called me a brilliant lawyer, and I was, except when I wasn't. But there's that little gap between only being brilliant in your good moments and being inspired. So I got to be one of the first people called a Mr. Mom, and I founded the Win-Win Institute. So I went away from practice of law and into mediation and win-win mediation and now windcrafting. And
That's
this is an
amazing.
idea whose time has come, and I'd love to share it with anybody, and particularly if you're in pain around conflict, that can shift so fast, and I would love to be able to help and have that happen.
Amazing, John. Listen, I would love to have you back. I mean,
I'd
we
love to
we
be back.
as our audience knows, you and I can go on forever, and sharing stories and
Well, I know
the idea.
you usually stop at 1 o'clock, but I'm awake. We could talk till midnight if you want to just start that way. We can just keep talking right now.
All right, John. Well, we need to break it up into digestible bites. How's that?
Fair
Right?
enough. Fair
Yeah,
enough.
yeah. But this has been amazing. You have planted seeds in my mind. I'm sure you've planted seeds in the minds and the ears of my listeners. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing what you're doing. Thank you for doing what you're doing. And
Thank you
folks,
too. And what a wonderful thing to get to partner up with you to help hopefully make a difference in some people's
it's so
lives. You're
cool. It is so
you're a
cool.
wonderful person to get to work with. I love having all in common with you that we do.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Folks, the name of the book is Windcrafting. Go to Amazon, barnesandnoble.com. If you happen to be in Arizona or in Phoenix, give John a call. And listen, John, thanks again. I love you. God bless you. And thank you for sharing everything that you're doing and everything that you've done for the world.
God
Um,
bless you too, and God bless everybody that's listening.
Yep, yep. Everybody, thanks for joining us. God bless you. I love you. And share this because holy smoke, you talk about helping people live better lives. And, it doesn't take much, but, we talked about pretty monumental shifts in this conversation. And, if just one thing hits or hits a note with somebody who you share this with, you've lifted that person, you've lifted the world. So
And
with that,
I'll add the one comment that the for people that do like to read, the book is a very efficient way. There are about maybe 7 or 8 ideas that you just need to know to not to be chewed alive by conflict. And there are 3 steps, and the book really lays them out. So it's a very efficient way to do that if you happen to like to read. Otherwise, let's talk.
and even if you don't like to read, here we
Well,
go again. We're going
uh,
anyway. With that, folks, thanks again for joining us. John, thank you, and we'll be sure to have you back. We'll see you next time.
to be continued.
To be continued. See y'all.